Hey everyone, this is Arya. I hope you're doing well. Today we are creating a simulation using dynamic paint, which is super fun. Also, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you're able to support me even further, head over to my Patreon page and become a member where you can get cool downloads as well as just support me to bring more tutorials in the future. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so open up a new scene, and this time we're just going to select the camera and the light and hit delete because today we're going to be using the default cube. So let's click the default cube, and instead of having a cube shape, you want to create a circle out of this. So the quickest way to do that is to hold Control and hit 4. And so now you can see that our cube has been subdivided. So if you go over here and check the modifiers, you'll see that when we hit Control and 4, it added a subdivision modifier and set the levels to 4. If we were to change this, you can see that it will change over here as well. And that will work from numbers 1 through 5. So let's just scale this up a bit by hitting S and typing in 2.5. Then if we hit N on our keyboard, you see that our scale values are set to 2.5, but to make sure that Blender calculates things properly, we just want to scale this back properly. So let's hold Control, hit A, and then you can hit Scale. Then just hit N to remove your menu, just so there's more screen space to work with. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is add a sphere. So let's just toggle into X-ray mode here, just so we can see inside our cube. Shift A, Mesh, and we're going to click Sphere. And then we can hit S to scale and type in 0.65. So now that we've got this outer sphere here, this is going to be our canvas, and we're going to use this as a brush. So we do want to animate this. So the next thing we're going to do is hit Shift A and add an empty plane axis. Then you can just hit G, Z, and type in 5. Keep in mind that we're going to use this to spin our sphere. So next we're going to click the sphere. You can also click it up here if it's easier. Then Shift, click the empty. Then we're going to hold Control, hit P to parent, and we'll select the middle option here, Keep Transform. Okay, so let's just zoom out a bit here just so we can see a little bit better. And we're going to go back to frame 1. Next, we want to animate our empty. So let's click on our empty, and then we can hit N on our keyboard to bring up our transform menu. Now, depending on which way you want to spin, you can choose to animate the X or the Y value. I'm just going to do the Y axis here, which is the green, so that our object will spin this way. Okay, so right click, and you can click Insert Single Keyframe. Next, just click this arrow here to go to the last frame in our animation. Click here and we can type in 2500 or something roughly that value. The higher you set this, the faster your object will spin. Right click and insert single keyframe again. Now if we hit play, you'll see that our object sort of speeds up at the beginning, and if we were to go to the end, it will also start slowing down, which is okay in some cases, but in this case we want to have a constant speed. So let's just click up here and switch our editor type to the graph editor. Click the normalize button just to bring everything centered into our view. Now you'll see that we've got this gradual curve, which is causing it to speed up and slow down. So what we can do is just make sure that you've got everything selected by hitting A. Next hit T, and you can choose linear, or you can right click in interpolation mode and click linear. Awesome, so now we can click on our editor type and go back into the 3D viewport. Hit play, and now you'll see that we've got one constant speed. Okay, so now we can move on to our dynamic paint. So we're going to click on our cube here, and let's just rename this to orb, just so we don't get confused as to what it is. Right click and shade smooth. Just make sure that you're on frame 1. Then we can head over to the physics properties on the right hand side here and click dynamic paint. There are only 2 options here as far as type goes, and the first is canvas and the second is brush. So in this case we want to select canvas so that our orb is the object that gets displaced. And then of course once we're finished our canvas, we'll set our sphere as our paintbrush. Okay, so back in the physics tabs here, we're going to click add canvas. You'll see the first option here is the format, and there's only 2 different types, and the first one is vertex, which will just use the amount that we have and displace it. So let's select vertex so that we can just displace our mesh. Then you just want to make sure that your start and end frame are matching your animation. Next we can scroll down and you'll see that there are a few different types. Today we're just going to be using the waves, but you could use paint, for example, if you're doing something like raindrops and you want to create some type of wet map, or like a blood splatter or a paint splatter or something like that. So I may go over that in a different tutorial, but for today we're going to skip that. The next option is displace, and you could use this for something like someone walking in the snow or snow falling and building up on an object. Weight I've never used, but I guess this is just for weight painting, so I'm sure there's some cool ways you can use that. And of course waves is the one we're going to be using, which will cause our mesh to act almost like a liquid surface. Then the first option here, open borders, it's a little bit harder to see on this type of mesh. Basically what this does is once the wave is created, if you had a plane, imagine it going out to the edge and then bouncing back. But if you've got open borders selected, your waves will just sort of dissipate off into nothing. I'm using it for this just because if you don't put it on, you get a little bit too much buildup of the waves. Okay, so let's set the time scale to 0.5 and set this to 3. Damping is pretty self-explanatory. This basically just takes all the calculations and dampens it or scales it down a bit. So let's just leave that as default. And spring pulls the water level back to 0, so basically how quickly the wave snaps back. And then for smoothness, again, pretty self-explanatory. This just smooths out the waves, so feel free to play with these a little bit. I'll show you once we add the brush how these can change, but for now we're just going to leave those both to 1. So that's good for our canvas. Next we can click on our brush. We'll come back over to the physics properties, click dynamic paint, click here, and instead of having a canvas, this time we're going to select brush and add brush. There are some different settings here, but these are more relevant to the actual paint option as opposed to the waves. Then we're just going to skip these options here because we won't be using them for this tutorial. Now is a good time to save your project if you haven't already. Head back to frame 1 and now you can hit play. Okay, so you can already see that we've got something happening here, but let's just make this a little bit more interesting by clicking our orb and giving it some rotation. So let's hit I to bring up our keyframe menu and we can click rotation. We just want to go to the very last frame of our animation and just give these some kind of random values. Maybe this one can be minus. This is really just up to you, depending on how quickly you want this to spin. Then once you've got that, let's just hover our mouse over here and hit I to set a keyframe. Now if we hit play, you'll see that we've got a lot more movement in our orb. So this is the point where you can start going through now and making some changes if you want. By the way, you'll see that because of our subdivisions, there is a little bit of a rough edge here. So head over to the modifiers here. Just make sure you save just in case. Click here and we can click subdivision surface. And leave it to 1 if you've got a slower computer, or you can set it to 2 as well. Back to frame 1 and let's hit play. Now you can see that we've got these really nice defined imprints. So I'm just going to head back to the physics properties here. I'm going to set my spring to something like 0.75. And I'm also going to change the smoothness to 0.5. And that's looking really good. So obviously your simulation is going to look a little bit different than mine. Hopefully I was able to give you a head start on some of these options here. But the best way to figure it out is to just set different values back and forth and see what happens. That's what I do. Okay, let's just go up and turn off our X-ray toggle just so we can see a little better. And once you're happy with your simulation, you can just make sure to select it one more time, head down to the cache, and hit bake. Awesome, so now you should be able to play that a lot quicker and things are looking really good. Next, we want to add our ground plane, so let's just bring everything up by clicking our empty and then shift click our orb, hit G, Z, and type in 2. Okay, so let's create our ground. So Shift A, let's go to Mesh, and we're going to add a plane. Hit S to scale and type in 15, then click. So now you could just add some subdivisions to this and add a canvas, but part of the way that I got the really nice lighting is to create a lot of ripples. So there are a couple ways you can do this, but I found the way to make it look most organic is to do a quick cloth simulation. And the nice thing about it is once we've got our basic shape, we can just apply the cloth simulation, which will make sure that our viewport doesn't slow down. Make sure to select our plane and we'll hold Shift and hit D to create a duplicate. Then hit Z to lock to the Z axis and we can just bring this up with our mouse. Okay, then let's just zoom out and we want to rotate this. So let's just face to the side here and hit R. Then if we just bring our mouse, we can turn this all the way facing down. Let's just come to the side, hit R again, and we'll just rotate this. Then we just want to make sure that it's above our ground plane. So hit G, Z, and click. Next, we can hit Tab to go into edit mode or click here as well. Right click and we'll click subdivide, and again you can set this to between 50 and 100 depending on your system. Now let's hit tab to go back into object mode, or again, you can just click up here. Make sure you're in the physics properties and click cloth. Scroll all the way down to the bottom, and the only thing we need to do is open up collisions and click self collisions. Finally, we just need something for this to collide, so let's click our ground plane, click collision, and let's just scale this up a bit just so that our mesh does not overhang. Then we just want to make sure our cloth sticks to this a little bit, so let's go over to the collision settings, set the damping all the way to 1, and we can set the friction to 80. Open up the cache settings and hit bake. Awesome, so now we can just scroll along until we find a frame where it's completely on the ground. Then we'll just go over to the modifiers tab, click this arrow, and we can click apply. Okay, so now that we've applied that, this is just a mesh again, so we can right click and shade smooth. Then if you're happy with this, you can just leave it. Now we don't need this ground plane anymore, so you can just open up these restriction toggles here. Okay, then if you're happy with this mesh here, you can just leave it, or you can just go up to the top left here and click this little menu, go into sculpt mode. And if you're using a recent version of Blender, hopefully you've got this cloth brush here. You can just click that. Then if you just go all the way over here and click, you can open up a bunch of different settings. Also, they're all located up on the top here, but sometimes it's a little bit easier to see here. I'm going to pretty much leave everything as is, but if you want to use a different type of method, you can choose between these. I'm just going to do a simple drag. Then when we're in the viewport, you can hit F and just move your mouse to scroll up the size and click. Then you just want to lift click and you can start grabbing certain areas here just to give it more of an organic feel. You can also change the strength. And I'm not going to take too much time just because this is a tutorial, but as you can see, you can just sort of drag things out here just to make them a little bit more organic for your scene. But again, you could fiddle with this forever, but this is just to give you an idea. So we can head back up to the left here and go back into object mode. Again, make sure to save. Then I want to subdivide mine a little bit more, so I'm going to head over to the modifiers properties, click here and click subdivision surface and set mine to 2 just to give it a nicer look. Now that we've got our ground, we just want to do a couple more things. So let's scale our transforms. If we look here, we want to make sure these are at 1, but if you set this to 1, it will just shrink. So what you need to do is hold Control, hit A. In this case, you can click all transforms just to set everything back to 0. Otherwise, if you don't do that, if you try to move this, it may feel like it's not doing the right thing. So ideally, when you're doing simulations, it's a good idea to set everything back to sort of a default state. I'm just going to move this over, so G, move, Shift Z to lock to those 2 axes, click, then I'm going to hit R to rotate, Z, and just bring this over a little bit. Now you can see that our center point is a little bit off, so let's right click, set origin, and origin to geometry. So now that we've got our ground, we can move on. Over on the right, we'll just click the physics properties. Again, we'll click dynamic paint, so let's click add canvas, change this from paint to waves. Open borders. Then I'm just going to show you the values that worked for me, but feel free to make any changes that you like and experiment with it because you can get a lot of different results. Okay, so let's just head back to frame 1, and of course now we need a brush to activate this. So just click on your orb, hold shift and hit D, then hit escape just to put it in the exact spot. Then we can come over to the physics settings and we can click remove canvas. Click here and let's change the type to brush. Next we'll click add brush and we can leave this as default. So let's make a few changes here. So we need to first separate our brushes. So you can just come over here to your scene collection and make sure to select scene collection and click this 2 times. Then we can name these B1 and B2. Then we want to make sure that we select our orb 2. We can rename this brush 2. Click and then we can drop this into this collection here. Then we can just grab both our planes, click and then shift click. Then we'll just drag these into B2 as well. Then we can just click, then shift click all of our remaining objects, drag and drop them into B1. Okay, so now we need to click on our orb. Make sure it's this one, not the other brush. Let's go into the physics properties, the wave settings, and we're just going to click brush collection and select B1. Now this canvas will only use brushes from this collection and it will ignore this brush too. Then we can do the same for our ground plane here, so we'll just click that. Let's turn off our X-ray just so we can see a little bit better. Then we'll just click our brush and go to P2. Okay, so now when we hit play, that's working a little bit better. And if we were to hide our brush, you could see that our other simulation is working like it should. Keep in mind that we did bake this earlier as well, so it wouldn't change, but if you were to delete this bake and not have this set up, you will have issues with your brush interacting with this canvas as well. Now finally what we need to do is just to make this all sort of go up and down, so we're going to add a new empty, so Shift A, empty and plane axis. Then we can hit GZ just to bring this up. Then we'll just scale this just to differentiate between the two. You can even rename this if you want to up and down, just so you know exactly what it is doing. This one, of course, you can call it rotate. That way things are just a little bit more organized. Okay, let's just make our brush visible again. Then we can click on our brush, hold Control, and we'll click on Orb. Keep holding Control, and we're going to click up and down. Then hover into the 3D viewport, Control P, and Object Keep Transform. Awesome, so now that that is all set up, we can just click on our empty and give it some animation. So make sure that your side menu is up by hitting N, right click on the Z axis, and click Insert Single Keyframe. Next we can go about 30 frames forward, hit G, Z, and we can just bring this down till it's just sort of intersecting our mesh. Right click and insert a single keyframe again. Next, we'll just click our original keyframe, hold Control and hit C while hovering over the timeline. Go to 60, then Control V. Now if we just go up to the left here to the editor type, we can go to the graph editor, hit A to select everything, Shift E, and click this option here. Now you see that if we zoom out, we've got an infinite loop. Okay, back up to the top and let's go back into the 3D viewport. Then we can hit this key to go back to the first frame, and just before we play it, let's hide our brush. So let's go up to the right here and make sure to click this and this. So you can turn off both of these here, but make sure that this one's still available. Again, you can just make changes depending on what you see. So you can just head over to the settings here and just make any changes that you like. Something like this should work just fine if you want to match mine, or feel free to choose your own. Okay, so we can hit play one more time and you can see that our waves are looking a lot nicer now. I found that adding some dampness helps, otherwise you get a huge buildup of waves over time, so just make sure to add even just a little bit. Then once you're happy with everything, we just need to bake, so we'll just go down to cache and we'll click bake. Awesome, so now that we've got all of our simulations ready, we can start adding our textures. So let's head over to the shading tab and we'll just go up to the right here and activate our render preview. We don't see anything because we don't have any lights. So let's just get a quick setup here. I'm just going to close some of these windows so there's more space. Then I'm just going to come over here to the world properties, and instead of having a color, I'm going to click this dot and go to environment texture to add an HDRI. Next, click open. I found that this one worked by far the best for this scene, so if you want to use the one I'm using, you can just head over to my Patreon page using the link in the description, and this is a free download. You don't need to sign up, so all you need to do is click this here to download. Click open. Then I'm going to set my strength to 3. Awesome, so we're getting very close now. All we need to do is add a couple of textures. So let's just click on our ground plane and click new. Then you can drag the metallic all the way up. And I'm just going to give us some more space to see. Click Shift A and then we're going to search for a color ramp. Click and then we're going to hook the color into the roughness. Shift A and search for bump. Then normal into normal. Shift A and we're going to search for noise. Click and then we're going to hook the factor into the factor. And we'll also hook the factor into the height. Then let's just drag this over a bit here and we can make some changes. Then one more node, Shift A, search, and we'll type in math, click, and then we're going to change the operation to power and set the exponent to 5. Click here and type in 22. Then for the distortion, we're going to type in 0.9. Then finally, we just want to animate this a little bit. So let's just go down to the left here. And then when you see this little plus symbol, click and we can just drag up to add a new window. Click here and we'll go to timeline. First, let's just click here and we're going to go to 4D instead of 3D. And basically the only difference is that we get this extra option here, which we can use just to basically change the seed. But first we can just change the scale to 22 and the distortion to 0.9. Then if we right click here and insert a keyframe, go to the final frame and we can just change this to something like 10 and add a new keyframe. Then if we hit play, you can see that our textures are moving. They do speed up and slow down, so the best way to deal with that is just to click on the noise texture, go to the graph editor, hit normalize, and again we can just hit T and set this to linear. Click and then we'll head back to the 3D viewport and save. Then the final thing that we want to do for this material is just to take our color ramp and drag this over so that we get a lot sharper reflections for our lights. Next we can click on our orb, click new, and we can add our final texture. Click here to set the base color, and we can just add some clear coat as well. And just add a little bit of transmission just so that we get a bit more of a glossy surface. Shift A and search for bump. Click and we'll hook the normal into the normal. Shift A and type in Musgrave. Height to the height. Shift A. Then finally we're going to type in Voronoi and set the distance to the vector. Click here to change the scale to 6 and the random to 0.5. Then we can change our detail to 25 and our lacunarity to 5 as well. Then finally we want to add some animation to our scale, but we don't want it just to go up and down. So what we're going to do is add in one more empty by hitting Shift A, empty plane axis. Again, we'll just hit G and Z just to bring this up. We can even bring this over just to bring it out of the way, it doesn't really matter. Then we'll just come up to the top left here and drag out a new window. Click to go into our graph editor. Make sure you're on frame 1, then we're going to set a keyframe by hitting I and clicking location. Next, just hover over the viewport, hit N, open up our transform options, and we just want to add noise to each of these. So click on modifiers, click here and noise. Then let's set this to something like 95 and we can set this to 10. Click here to copy, Y, and then we're just going to click here to paste and change the phase. Click the Z and we'll just do the same thing one more time. Now we can right click here and join these windows to get rid of that. Click back on our orb. Then we're going to right click our scale and click add driver. Don't worry about all this stuff, but just click here and we want to click our new empty. Now if we hit play, you'll see that we've got our animations changing. It is going a little bit weird, so what we can do is just right click, edit, and instead of having this +5, we can set this to 15. Then if we hit play, you'll see that our textures are changing, but they're not getting too small or too large. Okay, so that's it for textures. So finally we can head back into our layout, turn on our render preview, and the very final thing we need to do is add some lights. So Shift A, light, and we're going to click area, G, Z to bring this up. Then we just want to bring this back, so G, Shift Z, and we can just drag this over. Let's rotate this up by hitting RY, then RZ, and rotate towards our orb. Click on the light and scale. Click here and then we're going to set this to something ridiculous like 10,000. Then we can set this to a nice red color. And we'll just bring this a little bit further back just so that it's not so strong. Click and we can just make this a little bit deeper of a red color. Awesome, so now that we've got a good position for our light, we can make another light, so Shift D, then we'll click Y just to lock it to the Y axis, bring it to this side. R, Z, and we can just rotate this towards. Click here and we'll change this to something blue. The only other thing I did was duplicate this ground a few times and scatter it around. But before you do that, just make sure to add a camera by hitting Shift A, camera, and then you can hold Control Alt and hit 0. Awesome, so my suggestion would be to set up your camera first. Then you'll know where to put these, so Shift D, Shift Z, and we can just bring one back. And that's looking pretty good. So again, you can always change the size of your texture if you're feeling like this is a little bit too much. And if you want to have a finished background, you can just go into the shading tab, click here, go to worlds, Shift D to duplicate, Shift A and type in mix shader, click, and then we're just going to add this shader in, Shift A and type in light, and then set that to the factor. Now we can just go over to our render properties, all the way down to film, and we'll uncheck transparent. Then we can just select our color and bring this all the way down, and set our strength back to 1. Finally, we can just add some Eevee settings, so ambient occlusion, bloom, but let's bring this down just a little bit. Turn on screen space reflections and refraction as well. Then we just need to go to both our materials and make sure that that's set on as well. Click our orb and one more time. Awesome, back to the render settings here. You can add some motion blur for render if you like. Okay, so you can either click here or hit 0 on your numpad to zoom in. Click here to remove our overlays, and if you want to get a little bit nicer look, you can add some depth of field. So click on your camera and then make sure that you select this object data properties and select depth of field. Then you just want to have a focus object so we can select our orb. Then the very final thing that we want to do to make this look really nice is we're going to set our f-stop to 0.1. Now you'll see that we've got this nice bokeh look in the backgrounds. We can also move our camera by hitting F3. Then we can use E to bring it up and just use our mouse to aim it downward. Awesome, so I hope yours is looking really good. And if it is, you can head over to the rendering tab. Make sure to save your project, render, and render image. Also, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you're able to support me even further, head over to my Patreon page and become a member. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye!